When I saw Sarah, my wife, sitting on the roof holding Tyler, our 5-year-old son, surrounded by floodwater, I knew my life would never be the same again. That morning, pale yellow sunlight broke through thick gray clouds after the storm. Brown muddy floodwater covered the town of St. Martinville like a death shroud. On the emergency rental airboat that cost me $1,200, cutting through the water toward my mother's house, I could feel my heartbeat getting stronger with each pulse, like a premonition of something terrible waiting ahead. And then I saw them. Sarah sat huddled on the roof, her back against the chimney, one arm holding Tyler tight against her chest, the other gripping a torn piece of plastic tarp to shield him from the sun. Their clothes were soaked through, clinging to their bodies. Both their lips were blue, their skin wrinkled from being in the water too long. When I shouted their names, Sarah looked up, her eyes empty and lifeless, as if she'd already seen death. Tyler didn't respond. His head slumped motionless against his mother's shoulder. At that moment, when I saw my wife's eyes, I knew this wasn't just an accident. As the boat pulled to the roof, Sarah looked at me, her voice hoarse and barely whispered, You came." With shaking hands, I climbed onto the roof and pulled them both into my arms. Tyler's skin was ice cold, a feeling that made my heart almost stop. Just 18 hours before, I'd promised with a warm smile, "I'll be back to get you and Tyler in 2 days. You two will be fine." Holding them in my arms, I couldn't find words. My tears fell, mixing with the rainwater still clinging to my shirt. Right then, the only thing in my head was one question haunting me like a curse. Why? Why would my mother and brother do this? I didn't know then that this wasn't an accident. This was a carefully calculated plan, a lesson my mother and brother wanted to teach my wife. And I have proof. Follow my story to understand why a mother and brother could do something so horrific to their own family, and why I decided to take them to court. Hello everyone, I'm Marcus Thompson, a software engineer who is 34 years old and in Denver, Colorado. The story I'm telling you today happened 2 years ago. The story of how I sued my mother and brother because they almost killed my wife and 5-year-old son. My wife, Sarah, is 32, a dedicated nurse. Our son, Tyler, was 5 that year. Before everything happened, we had a peaceful life in Austin, Texas. I worked for a tech company, Sarah, at the local hospital. We'd built our tiny home, about 600 miles from my family in Louisiana. My birth family, that's a much more complicated story. My mother, Linda, was 60 then, living in the old house in St. Martinville with Brandon, my brother, who's 37, and Angela, his wife, 35. I was the only one in the family who went to college and left Louisiana, a decision that created an unspoken rift that was never acknowledged. During our monthly calls, I often heard Brandon say with bitterness, "You left your family behind to make money." My mother, with sad eyes, would usually sigh, "Brandon stayed to take care of me, but you..." The sentence always trailed off, but the meaning was clear. Looking back today, I can see those were warning signs I ignored. That summer, when I decided to bring Sarah and Tyler to Louisiana to visit family, I believed everything would be okay, that our differences would be healed, that my mother would love my son like any normal grandmother would. But that was probably the decision I regret most in my life. A few days after we came back to visit family, when an urgent project required me to return to Austin, I left my wife and son with my family for a few more days. Who could have guessed Hurricane Francine would form and intensify so quickly? Who could have guessed my own family could do something so unthinkable? I want to be clear from the start. This isn't a story about easy forgiveness, about blood is thicker than water. This is a story about boundaries, protecting the people you love, and how sometimes justice matters more than family feelings. But to understand why I did what I did and why a son could take his mother to court, you need to know what happened in the 5 days before the hurricane hit. 5 days of hell. 5 days before the hurricane hit, I brought my wife and son to the house where I grew up, the suburban house filled with beautiful memories, thinking this would be a typical family vacation. On the first day, I saw the signs, but I was so stupid for ignoring them. When our car pulled up in front of the old wooden porch in St. Martinville, my mother, Linda Thompson, 60, ran out with a bright smile. She hugged Tyler and kissed his cheek. Brandon and Angela stood behind with Sophia, their shy 3-year-old hiding behind her mother's legs. I thought everything was really okay. Everything started to change less than 2 hours after we put our suitcases down. At lunch that day, when Tyler refused to eat the black beans, my mother looked at him, then turned to Angela, her voice full of implication as she said to her daughter-in-law, "Sophia's only 3, but she's so much better behaved." Look how she finished her whole plate without complaining, while Tyler's a picky eater. That same day, Sarah went to the kitchen to help cook. While cutting vegetables, Angela looked condescending and asked my wife, "You don't know how to make gumbo? Everyone here learns to make this from childhood. I guess they don't teach that in the city." That evening, when we were getting ready for bed, I realized Tyler was put in the small room with an old rattling fan, while Sophia got the spacious room with air conditioning. I suggested switching rooms for Tyler, but my mother immediately objected, saying, "Sophia's used to that room. She'll cry all night." I considered getting a hotel room, but Sarah reassured me we'd be fine because we were just guests. By the second day, the discrimination became more obvious. After a trip to the grocery store, my mother gave Sophia a $45 doll, while Tyler got a $3 bag of candy from the gas station. My son looked sad, but he didn't dare say anything. That afternoon, Brandon pulled me out to the back porch, half joking, half serious as he said, "You make such good money working in the city, but you only send Mom $300 a month? I'm here taking care of her from morning to night, and I still have to cover her food and housing costs too." That joke made my heart heavy. I was angry but tried to control myself, not wanting to make things more tense. I knew Brandon and Angela lived with Mom and shared expenses, while I had to support 2 households. I'd even offered to increase the support to $500, but Brandon still wasn't satisfied. On the third day, things started to escalate. Tyler and Sophia fought over a toy car. As soon as Sophia started crying, my mother immediately ran over, hugged her granddaughter, and turned to scold her grandson. "You need to let her have it. She's younger than you. Don't you know how to be nice to your cousin?" Seeing this, Sarah gently told her mother-in-law, "But Mom, Tyler's still a little too. Maybe the kids could share." My mother cut her off, her voice sharp as she told her daughter-in-law, "Sarah, this happens when you raise kids city-style. Here we teach children to be considerate." I felt pretty uncomfortable with the different treatment that night, so I called around looking for nearby hotels, but everything was booked because of tourist season. I found Sarah crying in the bathroom, and we discussed cutting our trip short. But the plane tickets were already booked, and I'd already taken extended time off work. On the fourth night, an argument broke out after Tyler refused to eat his vegetables. Angela looked straight at Sarah and coldly commented, "You're raising him with that spoiled city style. Look at our Sophia. She's 3 and'll eat anything." Right away, my mother jumped in, sighing with a disapproving tone. Brandon stayed to take care of me, raises her child to be well-behaved and respectful. But Marcus, well, I won't say anymore. At this point, I couldn't stay silent anymore, firmly responding, "Mom, Brandon is my brother, not your daughter. And I didn't abandon the family. I went to work to support my wife and son." Early morning on the 5th day, I got an urgent call from my boss about a crucial multimillion-dollar project in Austin. I checked the weather forecast, and there were no warnings about Hurricane Francine then. I would take Sarah and Tyler with me, but plane tickets needed to be booked days in advance, and the project would only last 2 days. I promised I'd be back by the weekend. Before leaving, I hugged Sarah, whispered goodbye, promised I'd be back after finishing work, and told her to call me if there were any problems. Sarah smiled weakly, saying it was only 2 days, which was no big deal. Then I knelt to hug Tyler, told him to be good and listen to his mother, and promised I'd be back soon. His eyes looked at me with longing, his voice pleading that he didn't like it here and hoped I'd return more quickly. When I got in the taxi to the airport that morning, I looked back and saw Sarah holding Tyler, waving goodbye. I didn't know that was the last time I'd see them safe and dry before everything fell apart. After more than 2 hours flying from Louisiana to Texas, I arrived at the Austin office. I worked nonstop all afternoon and evening, determined to finish the project early so I could get back to pick up my wife and son. The next morning, while I was sitting focused on my computer screen, my phone rang, a warning message from the National Weather Service. 350 miles to the east, a tropical storm had just formed and was heading straight for Louisiana, and I had no idea that a cruel decision would be made. Around noon that same day, local TV stations in Louisiana reported that Hurricane Francine had suddenly intensified from a tropical storm to a Category 2 hurricane in less than 24 hours. New forecasts showed it would hit the St. Martin Parish area sooner than expected. At 1:30 p.m., I called Sarah to check on the situation. When she heard my voice on the other end, Sarah answered, "I'm hearing about the storm." With a worried voice but still trying to sound calm, my wife reassured me. "The local stations say it's getting stronger, but your mom says not to worry. She says this house has been through many storms before. Should I come back? I asked, starting to feel uneasy. With a more confident voice than before, Sarah told me over the phone. No need. Brandon says if things get bad, he'll take everyone to Aunt Martha's house in the Highlands. Don't worry, focus on your work. But just 30 minutes after that call, an emergency evacuation order was issued for all of St. Martin Parish. Emergency warning messages were sent to every phone in the area, and police cars drove through all the streets with loudspeakers urging residents to leave their homes immediately. I only know everything that happened after that from Sarah's account and the security camera footage I saw later. Thick black clouds rolled in outside my mother's house, and the sky darkened like night. The wind grew stronger and rain started falling, first scattered drops, then heavy. At 2:30 p.m., Linda looked out the window, worried as she told Brandon, "We need to leave now, the storm's coming." Sarah heard this and immediately ran to the room to pack things for Tyler. She quickly stuffed clothes, medicine, and some of his favorite toys into a small bag, then hurried downstairs with Tyler beside her. With an urgent voice, Sarah told her mother-in-law, "Mom, I've packed Tyler's things. Let's go." Then came the defining moment at 2:45 p.m. Sarah, holding Tyler, stepped outside and saw Brandon loading things into the 7-seat SUV parked in front of the house. As rain had started to wet their hair, Sarah walked closer to him and suggested, "Brandon, let me help. We should go quickly." Immediately, Linda stepped out behind her, her voice cold as she told her daughter-in-law, "Sarah, you and Tyler stay here. The car needs to carry important belongings. Brandon will come back for you." With a look of disbelief, Sarah replied to her mother-in-law, "But Mom, the storm's coming. We can all go together. It's a 7-seater. We only have 4 adults and 2 kids." As soon as she finished speaking, Angela appeared, carrying Sophia in her arms and holding an umbrella in her other hand. With harsh eyes looking at Sarah, she declared, "Sophia's only 3. She can't share a seat. She's my child, so I have to prioritize her first. You're an adult, you understand, right?" Brandon jumped in, his face annoyed as he told Sarah, "Sarah, don't make this more stressful. I'll be back in an hour. You're an adult, you can take care of yourself. Sophia's only 3. She needs her mother." According to Sarah's later account, while they argued, Brandon continued loading the car. A 55-inch TV, a medium-sized safe, 3 large bags of clothes, a box of family photo albums, and even Linda's precious china set. Standing in the rain, tears mixing with rainwater, Sarah made one last desperate plea, "Mom, please. Tyler's still so little. Let me at least go with everyone. I can sit on the floor, I don't need a seat." Linda turned her back, not looking at Sarah when she coldly replied, "Just stay in the house. This house has been through many storms. It'll definitely be fine. Brandon will come back." Tyler, only 5 years old, started crying uncontrollably, his voice breaking as he called out, "Mommy, Grandma, why won't you wait for me? I'm scared, Mommy." At 3:15 p.m., in the increasingly heavy rain, the SUV started and drove away, leaving Sarah holding Tyler tightly, standing helpless on the front porch in the growing storm. At that same time, I was still working in Austin, utterly unaware of the tragedy unfolding. I tried calling Sarah many times, but couldn't reach her. I thought it was a weak signal during the storm. I wanted to fly back immediately, but all flights had been canceled because of the hurricane, and I could only wait until the next morning. I had no idea that a cruel decision had just been made, and undeniable evidence had been recorded. On Tyler's 3rd day in the hospital, when Sarah was still waking up every night from nightmares about rising water, I got a call from an unknown number with a Louisiana area code. I hesitated for a second, then picked up, and that's when the evidence was revealed. It was Mrs. Robinson, my mother's neighbor. Her voice was shaky and worried as she told me I needed to see an important video. She wasn't sure if she should send it to me, but finally decided I needed to know the truth. In my quiet apartment in Austin, I listened as she explained the outdoor security camera system her son had installed last year, the kind that stores on the cloud. At first, she didn't pay attention, but when she reviewed the footage after the storm, she discovered something she couldn't stay silent about. The camera had recorded the entire conversation between Brandon and Angela before they left. 10 minutes after the call, I got an email from Mrs. Robinson with a 25-minute video. With shaking hands, I opened my laptop and hit play. The camera captured the front yard of my mother's house, a wide-angle shot that included the driveway. The timestamp showed this was 2:50 p.m., just minutes before they left, abandoning my wife and son. The first part, 2:55 p.m., showed Brandon and Angela standing beside the SUV, about 10 meters away from Sarah and my mother. They thought no one could hear them, but the camera recorded their conversation. Angela said coldly that leaving Sarah and Tyler behind was good, because Sarah needed to learn a lesson and respect her husband's family more. She even mocked whether Sarah thought marrying me meant she'd be spoiled. Brandon agreed, saying I also needed to understand that family was more important than work, and he and Mom had been shortchanged for too long. Angela added that if they got scared a little, they'd learn, and Sophia was the only grandchild living nearby, so she had to be prioritized. Hearing this, my heart seemed to stop. The blood in my body froze. They did it on purpose. This wasn't an accident or an unavoidable situation. This was a conspiracy. In that video, Brandon continued, saying the road probably wouldn't be flooded entirely for another hour, and he'd let Sarah and Tyler be scared for about 2 or 3 hours, enough for them to remember, then he'd find a way to return. Angela immediately agreed, saying that would be enough for Sarah to know that living in Louisiana wasn't as easy as in the city. The next part, 3 p.m., showed my mother coming out, approaching Brandon and Angela. The camera clearly recorded that she'd heard part of the conversation. My mother looked worried, asking if they were sure because Tyler was still small. Brandon reassured her he'd handle it. Then the unbelievable thing happened. My mother nodded slowly, agreeing to her son's plan. The final segment showed Brandon loading things into the car while there was still space. Then the car started and drove away, leaving Sarah holding Tyler, tears mixing with the rain. After the video ended, I sat silently for a long time, my whole body shaking with a rage I'd never felt. When I called Sarah, I couldn't stay calm. With a choked voice, I told my wife about what I'd just seen. Sarah was silent for a long time, then replied with a voice cold as ice. She said she'd known from the beginning. The moment she saw their car driving away, she knew they weren't coming back. That night, with unwavering determination, I called a lawyer in Louisiana. I said I had video proof that my mother and brother deliberately left my wife and son in a hurricane to teach a lesson, and I wanted to sue them, wanted them to pay the price. Maybe for everyone, the decision to sue family members isn't easy, but every time I heard Sarah recount those 12 horrific hours on the roof, I became more determined with my choice. She told me about those moments many times, in therapy sessions, during sleepless nights, in nightmares when she'd jolt awake screaming. Each time I heard it, I felt another piece of my soul die. When the SUV carrying my mother and brother disappeared, Sarah stood motionless in the rain, tears mixing with cold droplets. Tyler clung to his mother's legs, sobbing uncontrollably. With shaking hands, Sarah tried calling Brandon, but there was no signal. Called my mother busy. She even tried calling 911, but the lines were overloaded, and she waited over 20 minutes with no answer. I'll never forget the sound of wind whistling through the door cracks, Sarah recalled. It sounded like demons screaming. Around 4 p.m., water started flooding the house, at first just ankle deep. Sarah took Tyler to the window looking outside. The water outside was rushing like a waterfall, carrying tree branches, debris, and even a bicycle. There was no way they could swim in that violent current. Sarah hurriedly led Tyler to find higher ground, only to realize a horrifying truth. There was no second floor. This was a typical single-story house from rural Louisiana. In less than half an hour, the water had reached their knees. In a moment of desperation, Sarah received one last message from Angela. With a cold voice showing no remorse, my sister-in-law texted, "Roads flooded, can't get back. Try to hang in there." Sarah typed back with trembling fingers, "Help US. Tyler's scared." The message wouldn't send. The signal was gone entirely, and she couldn't call me either. When the water rose to waist level, Sarah suddenly remembered the hammer in the small storage room by the kitchen. Desperation had turned into survival strength. Tyler stood on a chair, water already up to the child's chest. He started crying uncontrollably, calling to his mother with a shaky voice full of fear. "Mommy, where are you going?" "I'm scared, Mommy." But in the urgent situation, with no other choice, Sarah waded through the murky water, gripping furniture to keep her balance, fumbling in the darkness for the life-saving tool. The power had been out for hours, and only weak light from the last rays of daylight pierced through the thick curtain of rain. When she got the hammer, Sarah returned to Tyler. The water had risen almost to the child's neck. She put him on the heavy oak dining table, the only thing solid enough not to be swept away by the water. "I put a chair on top of the oak dining table," Sarah continued, then carefully climbed up with Tyler clinging to my legs. The ceiling there was about 8 feet high. I had to stretch as far as I could, one hand holding him, the other gripping the hammer, hitting the plaster ceiling. Every hammer blow cut deep into her hands. Pieces of plaster fell, sticking to her hair, her eyes. Blood from the cuts flowed down her arms. With a choked voice, Sarah confessed, I had to hit it over 30 times. My hands got weaker. I was scared I wouldn't have enough strength. Hearing that, my throat felt like it was closing up. Finally, after breaking through the plaster panel and a wooden frame beam, Sarah created a hole big enough to get Tyler through. She knelt, holding Tyler in her arms. Sarah whispered to him, her voice gentle amid the rain pounding on the roof. Mommy's going to get you up on the roof. You'll be safe there. Mommy will follow right behind. With the unexpected strength of a desperate mother, Sarah lifted Tyler, guiding him to grab onto the ceiling frame beams and climb through the opening. When Tyler had made it onto the roof, Sarah rose after him, her hands torn from the hammer blows and wood splinters. On the steep shingle roof under the endless rain, they found shelter near the chimney. Sarah found a small, old tarp caught on the gutter, probably from a previous roof repair. She pulled the torn tarp toward them, trying to shield Tyler's head from the pouring rain. There, Tyler cried uncontrollably in his mother's arms, his voice weak and heartbreaking, Mommy, I'm scared. Why didn't Grandma wait for me? Why did Grandma leave me? Hearing that question, Sarah could only hold him tighter, feeling her heart shatter as she told the most painful lie of her life. It's okay, honey. Grandma will come back. Grandma loves you. And then began the most extended 12 hours of their lives. Rain without end, cold to the bone. Sarah used the old tarp and her body to shield Tyler, her back against the chimney, trying to keep him warm with her breath and weak embrace. Below them, the raging water flowed through the area, carrying debris from people's lives. Plastic chairs, trash cans, even a small refrigerator. Swimming in that water meant certain death. He was shaking violently, Sarah recounted. Clothes soaked through, wind cutting through like knives. With a voice breaking in pain, my wife continued, and he kept asking the same question over and over, like a knife stabbing my heart. Mommy, why doesn't Grandma love me? What did I do wrong? I promise I'll be good. Sarah didn't know how to answer. She held him tighter and sang lullabies, her voice cracking from crying and cold. No food, no water to drink. Tyler cried from hunger and thirst, but Sarah was helpless, with nothing to give him. At night, darkness covered everything. Only the howling wind and endless rain. Sarah heard distant cries for help, but couldn't do anything except pray that someone would find them. I tried to keep Tyler awake, Sarah said. I knew if he fell asleep in that cold. With a voice full of pain, my wife continued. But around 2 a.m. he was exhausted. I couldn't keep him awake anymore. At that same time, neither knew that my family was warm and dry at Aunt Martha's house. When asked about Sarah and Tyler, Angela just shrugged. With a cold voice, my sister-in-law said, I think they're fine. Sarah's a nurse. She knows how to care for herself. My mother sat silently by the window, hands trembling, but said nothing. Back on the roof, Sarah felt Tyler getting colder and colder in her arms. She called his name, shook him, tried to wake him up, but Tyler didn't respond. When dawn broke, Sarah finished the story. I looked at my son lying in my arms, lips blue, skin cold as ice, my heart breaking. With a voice empty like she'd cried all her tears, my wife whispered, I thought he was in danger. I held him, cried, and prayed for a miracle. And then, she heard the sound of a boat engine. That rescue image is etched like a scar that never fades. On the boat, after getting mother and son safely off the roof, the place that had become both heaven and hell for them during those 12 hours, I held Tyler in my shaking arms. The small body of the son I'd promised to protect for life now lay barely breathing, skin blue and ice cold. The last raindrops from the storm still fell softly on my child's motionless face. Right then, I could only pray and swear that if Tyler survived, I would never let anyone hurt my family again. Dr. Henderson looked at me at the hospital with heavy eyes behind his gold-rimmed glasses. His eyes had witnessed too many battles between life and death, but there was still an amazing glimmer of hope this time. Dr. Henderson told me with a deep and slow voice, Mr. Thompson, your son is fortunate. A few more hours and we couldn't have saved him. This is a miracle. In that moment, I stood silent in the hospital hallway, water from my clothes still dripping to form small puddles at my feet. Behind the glass door, my son's small body almost disappeared among the IVs and medical equipment. Only the steady beeping from the heart monitor, the only sound cutting through the silent atmosphere, confirming that Tyler was still alive. Dr. Henderson gently placed his hand on my shoulder, his face serious as he explained Tyler's condition. My son's body temperature when brought in was only 33.2 degrees Fahrenheit, a life-threatening level. At this temperature, all bodily functions nearly shut down. Slow heartbeat, weak breathing, and a very high risk of brain damage. I remembered my son's little hand, cold as ice when I touched it on the roof, and the feeling of despair choking my heart. That image never left my mind. The feeling of his ice-cold skin, blue lips, and tightly closed eyes. The doctor also explained they were warming Tyler slowly. This process had to happen gradually, because it would shock his already exhausted body if it were too fast. He looked into my eyes, professional but unable to hide his concern. This wasn't a typical case, even for an experienced doctor like him. The following hours passed like a waking nightmare. Tyler had a high fever, that's the body's reaction as it restarts, they explained. Then he started having mild seizures. Each seizure was like a knife stabbing my heart. Sarah lay in the room next door. She had saved our son with the incredible strength of a mother. 10 stitches on her hands, body temperature still not stable. But the psychological damage was even heavier. Sarah didn't say a word, her empty eyes staring at the white wall, jumping at every sound. I sat between the two rooms, between wife and son. Guilt crushed every piece of my soul. Why did I leave them? Why did I believe my mother and brother would protect my loved ones? In desperation, I called my mother and Brandon. But no one answered, and that drove me nearly insane. 2 days later, the miracle Dr. Henderson spoke of came true. Tyler woke up, his eyes wide open, looking around the strange room. No signs of brain damage, something miraculous after what he'd been through. When he looked at me, his dry, cracked lips moved slightly. Tyler whispered, weak as dry leaves, "Daddy," and I could only hold him close. Every wall I tried to build to be strong for my family completely collapsed. I cried like I'd never been allowed to cry. Tyler looked at me with innocent eyes that had faced death so closely. With a childish voice full of questions, he asked, "Daddy, where's Grandma? Why didn't she come visit me?" I didn't know how to answer. My heart tightened at this simple yet impossibly complex question. Trying to hold back the emotions welling up, I whispered to him, "Daddy's here with you now. Daddy will never leave you again." But in my head, a decision was slowly forming. A decision that would forever change our definition of family. 5 days after being hospitalized, after Tyler was moved out of the ICU and stabilized, I decided to drive to Aunt Martha's house. The water had mainly receded, leaving ugly brown mud streaks on every surface and a stench of rot and mold covering the entire area. Homes were destroyed, and trees fell everywhere like a war zone. But I didn't care about the devastation around me. I wasn't there to forgive. I was there to hear their explanation, if they could explain. When I pushed open the wooden door of Aunt Martha's house, 3 people were sitting in the living room. They looked up, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. The blood in my body boiled. My fists clenched so tight my knuckles turned white. The image of Tyler lying in a hospital bed, skin blue and pale, appeared in my mind. As soon as she saw me, my mother jumped up from her chair, eyes red and swollen, hands trembling. With a choked voice and pleading eyes, she said, "I'm sorry. I didn't think the storm would be that strong." I raised my hand, cutting off her stream of justifications. The anger in me erupted powerfully, hard to control. I emphasized each word with a cold voice. "You thought what? Thought Tyler would be fine when you left him in the storm?" Immediately, Brandon stood up, his face pale. He tried to appear calm, but his clenched and trembling hands betrayed his tension. With a voice trying to stay calm but clearly shaking, Brandon said, "Marcus, I didn't expect the road to flood that fast either. I was planning to come back, but couldn't. It was an accident, not intentional." Each justification made me angrier. I stepped forward, standing close to my brother's face, looking straight into his eyes. The rage made my vision seem to blur. I could feel my pulse pounding at my temples. "Accident?" I whispered, then suddenly roared. "You call that an accident?" I pulled out my phone, hands shaking with rage. My whole body was tense, and I had to restrain myself significantly not to punch Brandon in the face. With a voice that sounded like shouting, I said each word, expressing my outrage at Brandon's selfish choices. I pointed out that the car had enough room for everyone, but he had prioritized belongings over the lives of two people. I couldn't understand how a TV or a safe could be more critical than a 5-year-old child and his mother, his own flesh and blood. Brandon stepped back, his eyes running away, unable to answer. Hearing this, Angela from the corner of the room stepped forward. Unlike my mother and Brandon, she didn't show remorse. Instead, there was something complex and challenging in her eyes. With a harsh voice showing no regret, Angela shouted, "We had to prioritize Sophia. She's only 3 younger than Tyler. Sarah's an adult, a nurse. She should know how to protect herself. That's a mother's instinct." Rage erupted in me. I spun around, fists clenched so tight my nails dug deep into my palms. With a voice shaking from uncontrollable anger, I roared. "Instinct? Tyler's 5 years old and almost died." My 5-year-old son asked, "Daddy, why did Grandma leave me? Doesn't she love me? Answer me. Answer that question." That question silenced Angela. She turned her face away. I turned to my mother, feelings of betrayal and rage rising together. With a choked voice, I emphasized each word. "And you? You stood there, heard them decide to leave Tyler behind. Then you got in the car and left. You said nothing. You didn't stop them. You chose belongings over your own grandchild." Linda sobbed uncontrollably, tears streaming down her wrinkled face. With a trembling voice, she replied, "I love Tyler, but I was so scared then. I thought Brandon would come back. I didn't know what to do." I shook my head, veins bulging on my forehead, breathing heavily. With a firm voice, I emphasized each word. 7-seater car, Mom. 7 seats. Why didn't you tell Brandon to leave the TV behind? Why didn't you say, "No, we have to take Sarah and Tyler first"? No one could answer. The room fell into heavy silence, except for my angry breathing. Looking at all 3 of them, my eyes red with anger, I said with a voice full of rage, "Tyler was in the ICU for 2 days. The doctor said 2 or 3 more hours and my son would die. Hypothermia. Sarah has PTSD, can't sleep, and keeps jolting awake, screaming. That's the consequence of the accident you caused." After saying that, I turned around, walked outside, and shook my hands angrily. Brandon chased after me, grabbing my arm. With desperate eyes, he cried out, "Marcus, we're brothers. Don't do this." I stopped, slowly turned my head. My eyes were still full of anger, but my voice was frighteningly cold as I said each word. Right, we are brothers. But you left my wife and son to die. You still expect me to forgive you?" As I drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw Brandon standing in the middle of the road, both hands covering his face. Part of me felt guilty, but another part, a much larger part, only felt anger and pain. A month after the hurricane, I sat in the living room watching Tyler gradually recover and be able to play alone in the yard. The bruises on his hands were still there, but fading. Sitting beside Sarah on the couch, I gently took my wife's hand and shared my decision to sue my family, despite all the gossip about being an ungrateful child or not knowing your place as a younger brother. For a whole week, I'd thought about it a lot. This wasn't just family business anymore. This was a legal matter, about deliberately endangering lives, about having to take responsibility for your actions. Sarah didn't say anything for a long time. She looked out the window, watching our son play with his new toy car. Then she turned back, nodding in agreement. For Sarah, the painful image of being abandoned and the horrific fear on the roof made it impossible for her to forgive. In that moment, I could only hold my wife tightly and whisper an apology for letting her and our son go through something so terrible. Sarah buried her head in my chest, her shoulders shaking with muffled sobs. I realized how lucky I was that they were still alive and with me. Though my wife and son had survived, the price was too high. The psychological wounds would follow them for life. That very evening, I contacted the law office of Jennifer Martinez, one of Louisiana's top personal injury lawyers. Jennifer listened to my story without interruption. When I mentioned the security camera video, she asked me to send it immediately. After watching the footage, Jennifer called me back the next morning with a determined voice. This was a clear case of intentional endangerment. After a thorough discussion, Jennifer decided to sue Linda, Brandon, and Angela on 3 charges: reckless endangerment, child endangerment, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The legal documents were prepared within a week. The reaction came immediately when the lawsuit was filed and sent to my family. My phone rang nonstop for 3 straight days. Aunt Martha, various relatives, my mother's old friends. Everyone called to advise me to stop. That's your mother. Blood is thicker than water. You ungrateful child. You don't deserve to have a family. I turned off all their calls. Throughout the months that followed, I only focused on healing my wife and son. Sarah started therapy sessions twice a week. Tyler was enrolled in a special support program for children with psychological trauma. I no longer cared what anyone would say because what they did had to come with a real price, and I would never let them off the hook. 9 months after the hurricane, the trial against my family finally took place at the St. Martin Parish Courthouse in Louisiana. I didn't expect a family lawsuit to attract so much attention. The courtroom was packed with residents and reporters. Walking into the courtroom, I felt a complex mix of emotions: anger, anxiety, and a bit of guilt. Sarah gripped my hand tightly, while Tyler was left with a caretaker in the back. My son was doing better, but still jumped at the sound of thunder. My mother, Brandon, and Angela sat at the defendant's table, looking noticeably older after these months. My mother kept turning around, trying to catch my eye, but I didn't respond. Brandon stared at the floor as if searching for an answer. Only Angela still maintained a defiant expression. Lawyer Jennifer Martinez opened the trial with a powerful speech, her voice echoing throughout the courtroom. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, in the next few hours, you'll hear an unbelievable story. A story about a grandmother, an uncle, and an aunt who decided to abandon a woman and a 5-year-old child in a hurricane to teach them a lesson. The most shocking moment was when the security camera video was played. The entire courtroom fell absolutely silent. When the words "teach a lesson and let them be scared for 2 or 3 hours" rang out from the speakers, I could hear sharp intakes of breath, whispered "Oh my God" and "Jesus Christ" throughout the room. A woman on the jury wiped away tears openly. Expert testimony further clarified the severity of the incident. Dr. Richard Hayes from the National Weather Service confirmed they had 45 minutes to return Sarah and Tyler safely. The road only flooded completely after 4 p.m., while they left at 3:15. So what prevented them from returning wasn't the weather, correct? Jennifer asked. That's correct, Dr. Hayes confirmed, and I could feel a wave of murmurs spreading throughout the room. Right after that, Dr. Henderson presented details about Tyler's critical condition. When images of Tyler in the ICU were shown, I noticed many people in the courtroom crying. A large man sitting near me had to turn away, his shoulders shaking. But the most painful moment had to be when Sarah took the witness stand. My wife, despite going through 8 months of therapy, still trembled as she recounted those 12 horrific hours on the roof. When Sarah finished her testimony, looking straight at my mother, Brandon, and Angela, she said, "I'm a nurse. I've saved many lives. But that night, I couldn't save my son if Marcus hadn't arrived in time. Do you know what that feels like?" The courtroom fell so silent you could hear a pin drop. On the second day, the defendants testified one by one. My mother looked like she'd aged 15 years, her shoulders hunched, and she had more gray hair. She cried continuously, unable to answer the lawyer's questions thoroughly. When Jennifer asked about nodding in agreement in the video, my mother could only say "I'm sorry" through her tears. Brandon tried to justify that he was speaking in anger and didn't intend to abandon Sarah and Tyler. But when Jennifer asked directly, "Did you drive back?" Brandon could only remain silent. Angela remained firm in her position. "I'm a mother. My instinct is to protect my child first." She even said clearly, "I regret that Tyler got hurt, but I don't regret prioritizing my daughter." 2 days later, the jury returned with its verdict. When the jury foreman, a red-haired woman about 45, stood up with the paper in her hand, I gripped Sarah's hand tightly. The tension felt like electricity running through my entire body. Finally, the verdict was announced. My mother was found guilty of reckless endangerment and child endangerment, but not guilty of intentional infliction of emotional distress. Brandon and Angela were found guilty on all 3 charges. My mother collapsed on the table, sobbing uncontrollably. Brandon covered his face with both hands. Angela sat still, face pale but still not crying. The compensation verdict was delivered. Linda had to pay $35,000, Brandon $50,000, and Angela $45,000, totaling $130,000. Additionally, all 3 were banned from contact with Sarah and Tyler for 3 years, had to do community service related to disaster safety education, and Brandon and Angela received 6-month suspended sentences. When the court pronounced the sentence with the decisive gavel strike, I gripped Sarah's hand and turned to leave. I didn't wait to hear any more excuses or apologies. with $130,000 in compensation and a 3-year no-contact order. I knew it was more than enough for the legal system, but never enough for what my wife and son had endured. Walking through the courtroom door, I only heard my mother sobbing uncontrollably, Brandon's angry voice, and Angela's cold justifications. But those sounds had become foreign, like from another life. I no longer felt pain or rage, only emptiness and determination toward the future. Sarah squeezed my hand as we walked down the courthouse steps. Tyler stood waiting with his caretaker, looking at us with innocent eyes that already held too much trauma for a 5-year-old. Justice had been served, but no one really won that day. After the trial, I almost completely cut contact with my family, regardless of whether Aunt Martha tried to reach out. I remained firm in my decision, because I knew I didn't hesitate to abandon my family when they abandoned mine, but maybe between life and death, when people face the unavoidable, that's when we know what family really means. Nearly 2 years after the trial, when I believed I had no reason to contact them anymore, I unexpectedly received a call from Dr. Thompson in Louisiana. His voice was serious. Over the phone, the doctor told me, "Marcus, your mother doesn't have much time left. She wants to see you and Tyler one last time. Maybe only a few weeks left." I sat silently in my office chair in Denver, feeling something shatter inside me. That night, I went home and told Sarah about my mother's condition. She had late-stage breast cancer that had spread to her liver and bones. The doctor said only a few weeks to a few months are left. Sarah was silent for a long time, looking out the window. Her eyes reflected the dim streetlights. I wanted Tyler to see her one last time, just once or twice, and I'd be there the whole time. Sarah didn't need to go. I understood and wouldn't force her to see my mother. Sarah turned to look at me, tears already flowing. With a choked voice, she said, "You go ahead. But I can't go. I can't see her face. I still see Tyler shaking on the roof whenever I close my eyes." The following week, I flew to Louisiana with Tyler. My son was now 7, taller, but still kept that wary look whenever he heard thunder. At the hospice center, my mother lay in a hospital bed, her body just skin and bones. Her hair had turned completely white, skin pale as paper. When she saw us, her eyes lit up, then filled with tears. With a weak and hoarse voice, my mother said, "Tyler, I'm sorry, honey." Tyler stood far away, scared, clinging to my hand. He looked at the strange woman in the bed, not recognizing his grandmother. Tyler, with a trembling voice, asked, "Do you love me, or do you only love Sophia?" My mother's tears streamed down her cheeks. With a choked voice, she replied, "I love you. I love you so much. I was wrong. I was selfish. I'm sorry, honey." After 10 minutes, Tyler stepped closer to the bed. He looked at her, tilting his head like he was thinking deeply. Then, with a surprisingly clear voice, he said, "You did something terrible. But I don't want you to leave while I'm still mad at you. I forgive you." In that moment, my mother took Tyler's hand, sobbing uncontrollably. With a trembling voice, she whispered, Thank you for giving me this chance." We visited her one more time, a week later. A few days after that last visit, she passed away in her sleep. At the funeral, Brandon approached me, no longer with the defiant attitude from before. He was thinner, older, with dark circles under his eyes. With a shaky voice, Brandon asked, "Can Tyler and Sophia see each other? The kids are innocent. They could—" I interrupted. "Let me go home and ask Sarah. I'll get back to you in a few days." Brandon nodded slightly. With grateful eyes, he said, "Thank you. That's all I'm asking for." When the funeral ended, I watched Brandon standing alone by our mother's grave, his back hunched. In that moment, I realized that losing a loved one is painful for all of us. But the pain and betrayal might never really disappear. My story ends here. Today, I still live with the sole purpose of protecting my wife and son, watching them gradually recover from the deep wounds my own family caused. But when I think about them, I still have something I can't completely let go of, a complex bond of blood, childhood memories, and pain that can't be erased. And before ending this story, I want to ask you a question. What do you think? Should I let Sophia, an innocent 5-year-old, see Tyler? Should I forgive Brandon after everything he did? Or should I maintain boundaries and protect my family as I do now? Leave your thoughts. I want to know what you do in my position. Because honestly, there are nights I still wonder if I did the right thing. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you can follow my upcoming stories. Thank you for listening. See you again.